Are we live? Are we live? What's going on, everybody? Let us know if we're live. Been doing daily live streams. I'm getting used to them. Becoming like a live game. Live streams all year long, and now we're doing them every day for the players. All right, we are live. What's going on, everybody? For this one, we did. We've been having Giants fans on, Giants analysts, and we were like, all right, we're not going to do an interview for the preview pod because that will turn the preview pod into 2 hours, and I've got like 45 minutes. I could do a 45-minute monologue for this game. But had to get Shawn Syed on to talk again. Syed's scheme. He's an analyst covering the Vikings. Shawn, it feels like we were just talking 2 weeks ago because we were just talking 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, Bobby, appreciate you so much having me back on. It was really cool after coming on last time just to get the love from the Giants fans. Appreciate all the follows on Twitter. Ant, Mike's back. I know you guys are listening, and it's so cool. A rematch of a game that happened fairly recently is going to be a fun one to be able to watch again, and a really exciting game that first time for sure.
And it's interesting because the Vikings have played so many close games basically every single week. Like, what is it, 11-0, 12-0, or 11-0 and one score games, where every team that they play has that, like, if we just did this, we would have won. So obviously from the Giants' perspective, it's like, all right, we're 5 mistakes away from winning the game by 10 points. I feel like Vikings fans probably are like being driven nuts by the media, being like, "Oh, they keep winning these one-score games." Like, okay, and the other teams aren't. Don't get on us for winning.
It's been such a roller coaster, like such a crazy season. So, like, I'm not going to pretend to be a Vikings fan or like have been around the Vikings my whole entire life. Just to fall into this, what a roller coaster! And I think Giants fans take things so much better in stride, at least this year, where Vikings fans are really gung-ho about, hey, we need to prove ourselves. But to me, it's like, hey, the Vikings are in the dance. Like, it doesn't matter if they're for real or if they're X, Y, or Z. Like, they're at this point where they're hosting a playoff game where Giants fans, I think they know they're playing with house money in a lot of ways. But I think the Giants are going to be so competitive in this one. So it's such a fun clash of fan bases. And I think it's going to be a really cool environment on Sunday.
Just the NFC playoffs, I think what we try to do and what you try to do is talk about, hey, prior, contrary to what ESPN and Fox Sports says, like, the game's about a lot more than just the quarterbacks. But today I saw a graphic of like the NFC quarterbacks. I'm like, man, like this is kind of anyone's game right now. Like there's no quarterback in this that is just crazy, totally keeping you out from winning.
Like the future of football is on the other side of the bracket, and everyone else is just trying to keep it together on our side. Yeah.
Daniel Jones is the only first round quarterback in the NFC. So I want to talk about, we talked about in the last interview with you, like, what do the Vikings do now? Well, now we've got a game of film. It's like, okay, well, is this something that happened very often for the Vikings and it's just part of who they are? How can they build off of it? The first thing I want to talk about is Patrick Peterson. Obviously, he's been a great cornerback for his whole career, a little older now, but still good. And in this past game versus the Giants, he gave up catches, especially on those slants and skinny posts, those in breakers. But then he also gets an interception on an over route off play action, and that's, he's going to make you pay if you throw a ball slightly behind a player, which, DJ doesn't do much, but yet got a guy like Peterson take advantage. Is that something that Peterson's kind of been all year? Is that who he is at this point, where he's giving up those catches, but he's also going to make those big plays?
Yeah, I think the Giants game for Patrick Peterson was kind of almost an amalgamation of the entire season so far. And I think you really put it well. A lot of the times he's asked to kind of cover the deep and outside. So just as part of their coverage responsibility, he's going to allow some of those inside breaking routes where maybe there's a safety or a dropping linebacker that are going to kind of help take that. But he is still such a smart player. He had that game-winning pick against the Bills, and he's had a bunch of interceptions this year, including, as I know Giants fans remember, that tough one from Daniel Jones, where, as you said exactly, right, he is so smart. And he's still fast enough to undercut that route. And hey, if the ball's gonna be flying kind of left or right of your target, I think he can get his hands on it. But at the same time, there's certainly been instances where I think he's been a little hungry and kind of jumped on routes as they get into double moves and such. And he knows he's at the back end of his career, but still playing at a really high level. So it's definitely a little feast or famine with him. And I think as part of the defense, he's put in a little bit more conservative role. But what was interesting against the Giants last time was, they were in man coverage a good amount. And I think that's something that, Dable and Kafka saw and chose to attack vertically in a way that, I know Giants fans hope that they can turn over that success in the passing game from the last game over to this game.
Yeah, and you mentioned double moves because I want to know is that something that like for the Giants you had Isaiah Hodgins obviously got that catch on the sluggo, and then either earlier in the game Darius Slayton also I think got him a lot better, but there was pressure and DJ rolled out and the trigger on it. Um, is that something that's been like a season long thing with Patrick Peterson because he does play more aggressive, try to get in phase? Or is that something where it's like, hey, that happened this week versus the Giants. I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to me again.
Yeah, I think if you turn on the first snap of the Viking season, it was versus the Packers, and Christian Watson runs a double move and gets open, right? It's not that Patrick Peterson has a double move problem. To me, it's offenses that do a good job of giving a defender, hey, you have a reason to jump on this route, and it's something where, yeah, I think Peterson's been caught up on it a few times this year to the point where, hey, if you're the Giants, that's something where you're writing down. And in your meeting rooms, you're saying, hey, we've beaten him on this before. Let's get to it again. And on the opposite side, on the defense, maybe it's Donatel just letting Pat Pete know, hey, our defense is designed to force an offense to take these, look, if you get an 8-yard completion every once in a while, we can live with that, but we cannot live with that 25, 30, 35-yard chunk gain. So, it's something that I would expect the Giants to go back to because, Pat Pete, and then on the other side, Duke Shelley, it's something that I think is natural as a cornerback, right? You want to be a playmaker. Sometimes you're going to get caught on those double move routes.
Especially a guy like Peterson who's so confident in himself, and rightfully so, which is interesting because the Giants do, especially the last month of the season, they've gone to some of that shotgun quick game, which has meant a ton of slants, skinny posts, the quick game, which Peterson, did some good jobs jumping on, and Hodgins, the big-bodied 6'4" guy, he made some tough catches. So it'll be interesting to see like how if they change their approach and like, hey, stay aggressive because that's what they're going to live off of is a quick game, or if there's more kind of giving that up. And then obviously, Peterson, he will make you pay where if you don't have the speed to separate, like Hodgins doesn't really do. He had that interception on the, DJ put the ball slightly behind Hodgins and then had that interception. And I remember something very similar. You mentioned the Bills interception. I remember your breakdown on that, and like, okay, like this is why despite his age, he's still that guy.
Yeah, and I go back and forth in my head. I'm thinking, look, if you're a cornerback and you jump onto those and get that interception, like that is a true game-changing play. So I wouldn't want to really coach that out of someone. And as you mentioned, that kind of quick passing game, I just like really want to tip my cap to Mike Kafka and Brian Daboll and everything they've designed. Daboll would be my pick for coach of the year, I think, so clearly based on what they've gotten out of this team and very clearly designing an offense that I think gets more out of Daniel Jones. I think that's a special job and something that, Giants fans should be just encouraged about going forward, no matter who the quarterback is.
Right. I want to stay on the topic of corners. The Giants have faced, as the season went along, some corner blitzes. And I noticed the Vikings, they got a sack off of it, Patrick Peterson. But a lot of times I would notice it as they would send the nickel and they'd put the safety over the top. And even sometimes they would fake that. I remember down in the red zone, DJ tried to throw the smoke expecting the nickel blitz because the safety was, lined up over top of him. He stays it, and it ends up being a 0-yard gain. Was that a Giants-specific game plan because some other teams had success on that, or is that something that Donatello likes to go to?
I think it's been a little bit more just of a shift kind of over the last few weeks. They had a blowout, especially during the Colts game, they like in the middle of the game, I think shifted a little more towards, hey, let's get in receivers' faces and let's pressure a little more. So to me, it's a little bit, I think O'Connell said, he sat down with Donatel and they went through, hey, look, this is how I see your system and this is how I would attack it. And I think that prompted a little bit of Ed Donatel to get a little more aggressive, play a little man coverage. So I wouldn't say it was a Giant-specific thing. To me, and what's encouraging for Vikings fans is, hey, a lot of people criticize the Vikings for playing like off coverage. People said, oh, you guys are just playing soft zone. But now they've shown the ability and the willingness to get into man coverage and pressure in a way that, for me, the defense just wants to be a little unpredictable sometimes, right? I think if the defense rolls out the same exact look on every single third down, eventually an offensive coordinator is going to come along and say, hey, I know you're going to run that. We're going to beat that, right? But against the Giants, in their first matchup in Week 16, the Vikings had more man coverage. And now I don't anticipate them being a crazy high pressure team, but I would kind of think about that man coverage. So maybe that corner blitz, which we did see again later and stuff, I think they could pull it out again. And to me, that was a sign of, okay, we recognize that the defense needs to be changing up in a little way, not necessarily saying, hey, we need to send Pat Pete, but also putting a player in a position to succeed. So maybe not necessarily a Giant-specific thing, but an overall shift for the defense, saying we can be more versatile and get to different things other than just our kind of like classic zone looks.
I also thought it did a good job in a Giants specific way that Daniel Jones had no design runs in that game versus the Vikings. And a lot of times, like, hey, the end is taking the back. But if you've got the safety creeped up over top of the nickel corner, that nickel comes. Well, now you got a 4 or 5 yard loss because you were only reading the end, and that nickel came down and filled the edge. So that was something where it's like, okay, well, the Giants try and get some ways to where they can get to those design runs because that's a huge part of Daniel Jones's game. On the defensive side, how vulnerable is this Vikings offensive line right now? Because we know they've given up a lot of interior pressure. I know some of that could be because their tackles kind of have a tendency to wash guys around the edge too, and Cousins can step up into it. But you're down to now your third center going up against Dexter Lawrence, who's been, the players just voted him as an all-pro nose tackle, and then losing O'Neal at right tackle. Like, is that like the Vikings' biggest like weakness right now? Is that offensive line?
Yeah, I really think that, if you come away from this game and the Giants won, it is more likely than not, other than the usual Giants and Vikings shenanigans, that Giants defensive line dominating up front. And I would say that they are absolutely vulnerable, right? They're on at least their second right tackle. They've had more than two guys kind of shuttle in. They're bringing back, I think, Blake Brandel, who I believe his practice window, or he may have practiced today. Center, it doesn't look like they're going to get their starter back. He's had back issues that have been lingering and ongoing. So it looks like, as you said, that third center is going to be in there. And if I'm the Giants, like, I am foaming at the mouth. And I think what's hard to think about sometimes is people usually think of pressure as, hey, we're blitzing this team. But if you can pressure an offense with just 4 guys, that relieves a lot of stress on your back end, right? Especially if you want to get 2 guys to Justin Jefferson and you can get to the quarterback with 4 people. I think I said it last time, right? Giants fans, I know you guys remember, right? Like Tuck and OC, you got 4 guys in Tom Brady's face. If you can pressure that just really deflates an entire offense. So that's the hinge point where early on, I really want to see, is Dexter Lawrence just clobbering the center, right? Is Tibbs motioned or like set up over the right tackle and just kind of taking care of business over there? It's going to be something that I think, if I'm in that Giants D-line room, I'm foaming at the mouth a little bit getting ready for this game.
And it'll be especially interesting because of, who Wink Martindale is with his blitzes and stuff. But I remember, one of the first games I watched of Wink when the Giants hired him was that Bills playoff game where they held him to about 14 points that the Bills still ended up winning because they had that pick 6 towards the end of the game. And that was a game where Wink Martindale didn't really blitz a lot. Like, he ran his cover 1. And I don't think he's going to run cover 1 a ton versus the Vikings, but he didn't really blitz a lot. Like, he did some stuff out of 5-man fronts. And we talked about it last time where the Giants were kind of shifting to a 2 high coverage team and just, they were living out of cover 1 and cover 3 the entire year. And then that Vikings game, I think it was like their most diverse coverage usage where I think like, quarters, cover 2, like they used everything almost the same equal amount. And my question was, is this a symptom of playing Terry McLaurin and that Commanders receiving group and then Justin Jefferson? Well, then we played the Indianapolis Colts, who are not going to test you with that stuff. And they did the same thing. So it's kind of who the Giants are right now. And as their D-line gets healthy, I think we'll see more of that this week.
Yeah, to me, it's a real good shift of how the whole entire NFL is moving, right? I think it is more popular to play light boxes, right? I want to force the offense to run into these looks where, Dexter Lawrence is going to be able to take up more space than just one player. So saying we have 6 players in the box isn't actually just that equal, right? Where he can play 2 gaps and kind of just be kind of conservative, but also really attacking the runner in different ways. So I like it. And I like seeing it from Wink as someone who is obviously, like he's a part of NFL defensive history in a lot of ways. So to see him kind of evolving over the end of the season has been cool. And it is so needed for this game, right? I would be really surprised if, it's going to be a heavy blitzing game plan just because, again, if you can get to the quarterback with 4 people and keep those players in coverage, I think that's something you're going to be happy to do. And it was cool that they played Terry McLaurin before the Vikings. Then you can see, I know that you guys probably remember the double team clip in the red zone where Justin Jefferson still gets open. But the teams that have had success against Jefferson, who is, to me, really a top 5 undisputed top receiver in this league right now, it was the Eagles specifically, the Lions, and then the Packers. And in different ways, they were double teams, but they were really aggressive double teams where someone has to get his hands on Jefferson, right? I would hope on the Giants end that Adoree is back and healthy, right? Obviously, Xavier McKinney, he's going to be back, and he wasn't there in the first game. So I think having just better players in your secondary is such a big deal, where when you're down one guy in the secondary, the same as the Vikings offensive line, where I think of it also as a weak link system. I think we talked about last time, where if you put one of your better guys back in there, everyone else's responsibilities get a little easier. But if I'm the Giants, I'm putting my best guy out there. I think I'm trusting those 4 guys up front to get after the quarterback, and then, sprinkling pressure here and there. But I would anticipate, seeing those 2 high looks. And I would really like to see, I think, a little more aggressive double teams, as in playing tighter to that and kind of taking the air out of that route, for example, that we saw Jefferson run that touchdown against the Giants double team last game.
Yeah, and Jefferson's like the only, like, Adoree Jackson should be back and is like a really good corner. The last couple of years he's been like top 5 in yards per target. Like, he is a speed guy who can hang with a guy like Justin Jefferson. But Jefferson to me is just such a different animal. Where returning Adoree, I was like, I still think you need to double him, right? Like, even with as good as Adoree Jackson is, you still need to double him. But doubling him with Adoree and McKinney is a lot different than 2 waiver claims and Fabian Moreau and Jason Pinnock. So
yeah, that's such a good point. It just doesn't make sense to me to not double him, right? If it was a situation where, I think the Eagles are such a hard problem to answer, because it's like, okay, we have quarterback run game, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, right? I don't think the Vikings have that number 2 in the same way that the Eagles have, right? If I know Hockenson had a big game against the Giants last week, but if I'm the Giants, I am more than happy to see 11, 12, 13 targets going away from Jefferson to 1 target, where eventually you're going to have to win your one-on-ones elsewhere, and where I think some of Hawkinson's yards came on screens and things like that. And I think Jefferson had that late screen as well. But if I'm the Giants, it's hard. It's easy for us to say, hey, I need someone else other than Justin Jefferson to beat us. But that's the task. I think that's what probably keeping up Wink all week in meeting and prep this week.
So, but how did Green Bay specifically? So is it like you were saying, just kind of bumping him up at the line and, having that, that safety over the top, or was there like a bunch of different looks they threw at him, or what?
Yeah, great question. So I think that the way their game plan was, it was based on where Jefferson was in the formation. So if Jefferson was in the slot, there was an aggressive double between Jair Alexander, who's of course the top cornerback in this league, and the safety. In a way, I keep saying aggressive double just because I think of just having a player over the top in a double team, it just hasn't worked the same way. Jefferson's gotten open against those kinds of double teams. And then when Jefferson was outside, having Jair press him and playing kind of cover 2 to that side. And I know that Wink has those kinds of things in his system because he's shown it in different ways. And then part of it was, I think Jefferson's footing was having a little bit of tough time in Green Bay. He shouldn't have that, right? Obviously at home against Minnesota. But at the same time, being able to get ahead on special teams, the Packers had that kick return touchdown, and really just getting physical with Jefferson and winning on the offensive end, as in if the Giants offense can kind of build that lead and you're forcing the Vikings to be just even more predictable, I think that's something that, the Packers really benefited from. And I don't anticipate that those same things being repeated in the way that the Packers had that big special teams touchdown and all the other kind of craziness going on in Green Bay. But yeah, that tape I think is something that Giants fans could watch, and Giants defensive coordinator, I know that Wink Martindale saw that and was thinking, okay, we base it a little bit more on his formation because of what Jefferson does at a different spots. And the way that the Vikings respond to that was by sending Jefferson in motion kind of across the formation. At that point, it was a little too late, but I really like watching this year. And Kevin O'Connell's had different defenses face Justin Jefferson in different ways. So he's kind of had different solutions and then showing, okay, the Packers are going to play this kind of formation-based press defense. Now we can send him in different directions to kind of conflict you. So it'll be interesting, if that's the way the Giants have their game plan, and then how KOC comes out and then kind of fights back against that as well.
I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll go to the chat for a couple ones to close out. Back on the offensive side for the Giants. The Giants, the way they run stick is, they use their outside receiver, and they use Saquon Barkley as essentially the flat on those swing routes. And versus the Vikings, that was the most times Saquon, caught the ball out of the backfield. I think it was 8 catches for 49 yards. Which is, you think he'd have some bigger performances in the receiving game, but that was the one. And again, it was all those flats. You saw it the week before versus the Commanders on Sunday Night Football that they started going to that in there when they like that's basically their version of stick. Is that something that with the quarters defense that the Vikings like to run that they're willing to just give up, or can you see them like trying to have the end follow out with him a lot more this week?
Yeah, it's definitely, the defense is almost designed to force you to throw that route. And it's funny that one of the best Giants playmakers is that spot, right? So that's your thing. And you're saying, hey, I'm either going to make my nickel pass defender his life hard, or one of my linebackers has to chase that. And the whole goal is we're putting a roof over the defense, right? Let's force you to dink and dunk down the field. And if we can keep tackling well, we're going to end up in a successful spot. So I did really like the Giants' offensive design, and I would still expect them to kind of go to those different flat routes in ways to make the linebackers' life hard. And I think the Vikings struggled with different teams doing that. And it was actually impressive to see, okay, they're responding really well. And to me, that clearly showed, okay, Ed Donatell really, really focused in on this, because this is something the Giants hang their hat on. But the Giants have so many things, I think, in their arsenal. I love the way they use Dalen Jones under center play action. And you mentioned Dalen Jones in the run game earlier. He had that nice scramble, obviously, as part of a pass, but I would anticipate seeing him at least get between 5 and 10 carries, and that is absolutely something that would stress me out on the Vikings end. So, and I think that the way that they run stick, you can have your quarterback be a keeper as part of that as well, right? Stick draw. There's clips you can see Cam Newton doing it and things like that. And the Eagles ran it a different way, where I think that they're just keeping it and they're not reading anything. But Daniel Jones in the run game, I think, will also be able to take stress off of Saquon Barkley having to really, really carry that load this week.
Yeah, and we've seen them, they'll get to draw out of, in fact, they might have even ran draw. They might have not read option in that game. And especially the playoffs, you're not going to be as worried about Daniel Jones' health, where you'll be a little more willing to run him between the tackles. All right, so hit us with some questions before I let Shawn go. Let's see. And then, do you mind if I read an ad real quick?
Please do.
All right, well, I'm going to read an ad. I always announce that to the listeners. I'm going to read an ad. This live stream is brought to you by DraftKings Sportsbook. The NFL playoff picture is locked in, and my go-to place for wildcard round action is DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. To kick off the road to the Super Bowl 57, new customers can bet just $50 and get $200 in free bets instantly. Plus, all new and existing customers can get a no-sweat bet each day of the wildcard round this weekend. Just place any NFL bet of your choice, and if it loses, you'll get a free bet back up to $10. Action's so good, why bet NFL playoffs anywhere else? So if you bet the Vikings, you can still get your money back or get a free bet or something like that. So just bet on everything Giants this week. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code WORLD. We got a new code this year. It's WORLD, not Giants, WORLD, as in talking Giants versus the world. New customers can bet $5 on the NFL and get $200 in free bets instantly, only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code WORLD. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. All right, let's get to some questions. Here we go. This is actually a good question. Do you think Irv Smith has a decent sized role in the game Sunday?
I think that he will definitely play. I think that he played a little bit last week, if I remember correctly, and he was able to just spell TJ Hawkinson in different sets. And he was really relied on in that Eagles game to be that, okay, well, they're covering Jefferson. Where do we go? So maybe not a decent sized role. I think you'll see him definitely, and in sets that should stress out the Giants defense, because if you can get in those heavier sets and force Wink to kind of compress his defense, that's going to open up the pass game. So I'm glad that Shawn mentioned Irv Smith. I wouldn't anticipate Irv Smith, catching 10 balls or anything, but his ability to allow the Vikings to have more flexibility on the offense, playing heavier sets where the Giants are going to have to decide, are we going to continue to play a light box, or are we going to devote a lot of resources to the run game? So I think he's going to have a role. I would expect, certainly, I think maybe between 10 and 15 snaps, but wouldn't expect him to be a kind of a major threat in the pass game this week.
Right on. One of our favorite followers, Doug Analytics. What is the most likely game plan change from the Vikings from week 16? Or will they change at all? That's my question, because the Vikings are a team that has won so many close games that it's okay, this is just kind of how we win, where it's we don't need to change up a ton. But I can also see them change, okay, we got what the Giants coaching staff does adapt to a lot of stuff on a weekly basis, and then being ready for some things.
Yeah, so I think that also just thinking about last game, right? The things that are really hard to repeat, right? There was the blocked punt, there was the record-setting field goal, that interception, that forced fumble. So to me, if I wouldn't call those plays lucky, right? I do think that a lot of that goes into skill and schematic things. Those are harder things to repeat. I would expect a lot of the game plan to carry over, because I'm not exactly sure how much can Daniel Jones replicate that vertical passing success as the first game, right? I think maybe on the offensive end, they run a little more inside zone where it seems like the Giants defense has a little bit more of a hard time kind of stopping those gap scheme, kind of attacking runs. And Dalvin Cook, I think, had some success on inside zone, which is still zone, but it feels a little more attacking the way the Vikings run it. So, I'm not expecting huge game plan changes. I think that Kevin O'Connell has a few different answers for how to deal with, okay, Justin Jefferson is doubled. And I do think that maybe we just see a more expanded route tree from TJ Hawkinson, where he was able to have success in that first game and to be able to do different things there, I think is going to be key. And, playing man coverage, playing tight to routes is to me a technique thing a little bit, as well as just a scheme thing. So really being able to play better in coverage, where I don't expect vastly different coverage calls or anything, but where the Vikings still want to challenge those receivers. Now, the big thing is going to come up is, well, what are Donatell's in-game adjustments to when Daniel Jones runs the ball, right? Because I'm going to be very surprised. I keep mentioning it because I feel like it almost like bothers me how much I know that we're going to see it and it can be successful on the Giants end is, well, how do you respond when Daniel Jones is running the ball? So to me, it's more of a, hey, that's something that we're going to build in on our defensive game plan, and less of a full game plan change, but more of kind of feeling out how that goes.
Yeah, and I think because they didn't run it much in that first Vikings game, and we talked about, like, the nickel with the safety over the top makes it a little harder than just your clean read option. I think the Giants are going to add a lot where you have the X receiver come and crack the slot player and bring the tight end across the floor. I think they're going to throw a ton.
I think it's hard for you to hide it's hard for you to hide your quarterback in the playoffs. Like, it really is. I think that, Cap Van Dable, who I no hesitation in continuing to praise, that not that they hide the quarterback, but they understand Daniel Jones in different ways. So it's going to be interesting. I think in the first quarter, we'll get a feel for, okay, are these teams doing something drastically different? Now it's an in-game adjustment, as opposed to saying, okay, well, our whole kind of game plan is going to be so different. I think Daniel Jones, he struggled a little bit. Seemed like on those RPO throws where it was a little more horizontal throws, just some accuracy issues. So, if he can't throw the ball vertically the same way he did, maybe it's those routes where, I think there was one early on, or maybe it's in the third quarter, where it was just a drag route underneath, and that's difficult for man coverage to follow. So maybe a few more man beaters from the Giants in this one.
Yeah, I think that was on mesh, which they ran so much at the beginning of the season. They haven't ran a ton lately. It was Slayton that got open on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just tough for every coverage, especially when it's run well. But I would like to see, I think, the Giants run that more. And look, if you're going to play a man corner, like, go ahead and chase this guy across the whole entire field, work through traffic, and we'll see if you can get by that.
Non-scheme question. Are Minnesota fans loud, or will they prove Nick Gates right? Did you see that? Nick Gates is like the player we're the closest with, and he's just like, hey, they weren't as loud as I thought. And now they got Undisputed talking about it. And everything.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in New Jersey, and, I would go to Giants Stadium for for high school state championship games. That the old Giants Stadium, I feel like, is just different. To me, it seems like the US Bank Stadium crowd is great. That week particularly was their whiteout week. It was after the Colts game. So maybe Vikings Nation was just totally drained, but I don't know. To me, it seems like that they'll show up and they'll get loud, but in the NFL, it's so funny. It's the smallest margins that really make a difference. I think home crowd can absolutely have an advantage, but particularly for the Vikings guys who I know love playing on turf. But to me, it does get loud, but I know that, being from the Northeast myself, our definition of loud might be a little bit different than Midwesterners for sure.
It was just funny though how such a little quote became like this thing where they're talking, Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp are talking about Nick Gates, because he's just like, hey, it wasn't as loud as we thought, and that's such a huge like bulletin board material. Like, you guys aren't that loud.
Well, hey, look, Vikings fans, I hope that some of you guys are listening too. Go get loud on when we're on defense, but not too much when we're on offense. And I think it's gonna be a fun one either way. So that's a funny little thing for sure to be able to track. Maybe I'll turn my volume up a little bit higher when I'm listening to the game this week for sure.
Yeah, maybe I'll just like share clips from the game and just put it on mute, but I can't even hear the crowd. All right, well, let's get one more question in here for Shawn, and then we'll head out. Let's see, and then tomorrow we'll be recording our preview pod. That'll be out Friday, and I think we'll try and I'll be in New York, so we'll try and do something live from the studio. Get some questions.
Bobby, while you're looking for one, I may have to give my final score prediction. I don't know if you want to end on that, but I got to put this one on wax for sure. Yeah, so it was 27-24 last game. I'm thinking the same score. I really do. I think the Giants are going to win this game, and I think it's because the things that happened for the Vikings to win that first game are hard to replicate, right? The Vikings have had multiple blocked punts, but I can't see that happening in the same way again, right? You know, that interception, that fumble, that literally record-setting kick for the Vikings are things that are hard to replicate. And while I don't think the Vikings, you know, play the cleanest game, the Giants have, you know, defensive backs coming back, and that defensive line, it just scares me, right? And I think that I spent too much time, you know, again, while I grew up in New Jersey, not being there anymore, just seeing playoff defensive lines really, really, really be able to just ruin a game. And it is disheartening on the offensive end when you can't do anything. You know, even the way that you want to run play action, the way you want to run rollouts is just deflated by, you know, attacking defensive ends that are athletic and kind of play like that. And so while I'm not sure if Daniel Jones can have the same game where I thought he just played well against the Vikings in a lot of ways, and those receivers may not be getting open the same way, I think that, look, I would love to write about the Vikings for another week. It's been a crazy roller coaster, but I think that Giants fans should go in and feel good about this. Not saying the Giants should be the favorite or anything, but my prediction is going to be that the Vikings lose this game in unfortunate fashion to your guys' Giants.
Well, now you have a lot of fans in the chat. Yes, sir, Shawn. Shawn knows ball.
Wait, that wasn't the goal. That wasn't the goal.
Shawn,
it may be just like just the scars that I've built up from watching the Vikings just really goof every third quarter away. But I don't think Daniel Jones is the biggest long-term answer for a team, but I was impressed by that game he played against the Vikings. And the Vikings are a secondary where they can be had in different ways. And, you know, I think Daboll has playoff experience, and, you know, maybe playoff experience is something that's overrated, but, you know, I've just like really fallen in love with Daboll and Kafka this year, and would hate to see if Kafka, obviously would love to see the success, get a head job elsewhere, but, you know, would love to see them kind of continue to build on that offense together going forward.
Definitely. All right. Well, people can follow you at Syed Schemes, and it's not just a follow for this game or for the Vikings. Like, you are constantly putting out good stuff. You will definitely learn more about football if you follow Shawn. Shawn, I appreciate it. Are the Vikings? I think the Vikings are on I think we play the NFC North next year, so I think we might be talking. Actually, no, we played the NFC North this year.
Bobby, we got a game.
So we don't get to talk next year.
That's all that has to be worried about is this game on Sunday. I know it's the Jones contract. Is Kafka in another job? What's going to happen when they're in the receiver room for the Giants fans? But there are not that many weeks left where we have football to watch. So let's take it one step at a time. Bobby, I always appreciate you. I love what you guys put out, and, you know, Giants fans, you guys always have a soft spot in my heart. But I hope the Vikings win. But still, appreciate it, Bobby.
I appreciate you, Shawn. Thanks.